So, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Today is a very special episode because you were my first guest back in 2022, where we reflected on the post-COVID environment and what that meant in terms of health inequalities, and you shared your perspectives. And we've come full circle because today is the last ever Pull Up a Chair podcast episode, and so much has happened since we last spoke. So it felt really opportune to have this episode dedicated to a bit of a reflection and a little bit of a look forward in terms of what's going on. The world has moved on geopolitically, economically, and technologically in even those 3 years. And I just wanted to get your perspectives on how resilient you feel businesses are against the shocks that we're seeing of this scale and frequency.
Well, firstly, let me say how honoured I am to be both the first and the last. So thank you very much for that. Who would have believed, when we were talking about COVID, we had no idea what was still to come. And I think out of necessity, businesses have learned how to be resilient, adapt, to be agile, because, it's the way the world's going. But each stage, something different has been learnt. I mean, I think for me, looking back on COVID, thank goodness, the technology was there. Thank goodness that we were actually able to, have remote access to people, and people could work effectively. I'm pretty sure that had that not been available at the time, we probably would have made some different decisions about getting people back to work and risks and so on. But I think the other profound step of COVID was that actually you could communicate simultaneously to everybody around the world. So, for me and for what Emma did at GSK, re-establishing purpose and connectivity, and joining up an organization through these challenging times was really remarkable. And for me, the really big lesson has been, the power of purpose, and make sure that people really do understand what they do and why they do it. Yeah, not long after that, we went into the energy crisis and all the implications of that. Same thing. How do you be really agile about supply chains, about energy security, about how you deal with sanctioned countries? And, for us, supply chain resilience became really, really important. I think in some ways what we're facing now is the most difficult of all, because we have got a fragmented world, more so I think than ever before. I think supply chains of resilience is back into focus, but I think the really challenging piece is that this time, the business model is under pressure. How do you absorb tariffs for the pharmaceutical industry? How do you absorb global pricing, or most favored nation pricing? These are really, really difficult challenges because they really cut to the core of the business model. But, if you're not resilient, if you're not adaptable, if you don't have a clear purpose and vision, if you don't have leadership that can present themselves continuously, it's a struggle. And, the same from KPMG, you've adapted in the same way.
Absolutely. And we see our clients adapt and navigate some of these, fractured, markets that we're operating in, and what's going on around us geopolitically. We have to navigate and we have to think through. When we spoke the first time, one of the things you said was social inequality was one of the biggest challenges, and you reflected on the social factors, whether it's work conditions, living conditions, and you've just alluded to some of those. Do you think, sort of 3 years on, despite the geopolitical, supply chain resilience, again, one of the biggest, number one things that clients talk about, do you think that social inequality still remains one of our biggest challenges?
Yeah, I think I feel that even more today than I did
Yeah.
3 years ago. At the time, I think, we were dealing with the near-term consequences of COVID and some of the very difficult choices that were being made about, being able to work, who can work, when can they work, how do you protect the elderly and the vulnerable. But I think we're now starting to see that there was a silent impact for those at university who couldn't go through the normal experience, young people in the early stages of their career who couldn't engage or interact with people, young people with their education suspended and, interrupted. And I think you're now starting to see quite a profound bow wave of, mental health issues coming through. And I think that, that on top of all the other inequalities, I think is sort of is a profound impact of COVID to add on top of, tend to what you think about, the inequalities is really effectively being, people in mid and elder life going through chronic disease and in fact in impacting their ability to work and engage. Now it's the young people, and that's a tough one.
Yeah, and we're very mindful of that because in our organisation, people went through schooling or higher education at a point where it was very difficult to be interacting socially. So, to reflect that in how you operate and how you work it's been quite a challenge, but also something we need to focus on, right? I'm going to turn to life sciences. So there is significant opportunity for life sciences, and we all know it's a very critical sector. Some data suggests it's going to be worth something like 214 billion by the early 2030s, which is unfathomable really in terms of scale, but we talk about that in a minute. It's been recognised by the government in its industrial strategy as one of the key sectors. I'd like to just get your perspective, because I know you're very vocal on the life sciences sectors, and partly because of your background, but partly because it's your passion. I'd love to get your views on life sciences as an engine of growth for the UK and how you see that sort of rolling out.
Well, let me be clear. This is the most exciting time I have ever experienced in science and life sciences. And, if the UK plays its cards right, it can be right at the centre of the next generation of science and breakthroughs in life sciences. And there are several reasons behind that. Number one, we do have an outstanding record of scientific innovation. The number of Nobel Prizes that have emanated from the UK, the breakthroughs in biology or genome sequencing, and many of the things in physics that have emanated from here. That has, through all the economic ups and downs over the decades, we've never lost that. So the foundation is incredible, and it's a real privilege of my role as a life science champion is that I get to see it, and I get to make visits to, some of the great centres, and on top of that, the potential of a single payer system and a single reference code for, all of your medical interventions from the day you were born to the day you would die is unique. There's no other country that has got, 60 million complete health records, and with the wonderful genetic diversity that comes. The challenge, as it's always been for the UK, is, can we turn that potential into a great industry? And it's a challenge. And if we don't do it now, I don't think we ever will. We have to bring capital and ambition, to turn these ideas and potential into not just innovation and economic growth, but in meaningful impact on the health of the nation. So I've never been more excited about where the UK is in its scientific journey, but a bit anxious about can we do it this time? Because the flow of we can't afford to import capital and export wealth in the way that we have done.
There is also a lot of focus on AI and space as a critical domain, and I think both those have significant opportunities or bring significant opportunities for an organisation like GSK. I just wondered if you were happy to share how you're using those or how you're thinking about AI and space to further, whether it's development of drugs or whether there might be other things that you're doing.
Well, part of the reason why this is a golden age of science is because, the ability to interpret vast pools of data. I mean, if you take a single genome, 2.3 billion base pairs, and you're looking for errors in individual letters of, and then to be able to compare that with tens, hundreds of thousands, and ultimately millions of people, and to be able to interrogate them horizontally and vertically, that's a data problem. Only since we've been able to store that information have we been able to interpret. And now, we're able to go into the subgenomic components, and that's why physics is so important, because we're measuring ever smaller cellular particles. And that generates vast amount of data. So we can only be this excited about science because of the computing and analytical tools that are available. We recognize this really right at the beginning of the reform of GSK 6 years ago, and a bit before that when Emma took over as CEO. We saw the opportunity that data had and the analytics that came with it. We are building one of the largest data sets in the industry. We have, I think, one of the largest teams of software and software engineers and data scientists, because we see it as a data an interpretation challenge. And I've said this many times before, that I think that ultimately GSK will become a data and analytical company that uses biology as one of its core inputs.
You've reported stronger than expected results, and Emma has been very open about talking about the importance of the investment in AI and technology to make the organisation more resilient. In terms of addressing health inequalities, one of the big things is to be able to provide access to healthcare and resources and products that are relevant for those countries or those populations. You talked about regional resilience, because, and I guess, you're very passionate about global health equality and addressing the inequality in that. Do you think that gap is closing? And as you, just reflecting on what you've just talked about, how do we ensure that we keep closing that gap?
Yeah, this is a really, but and I suppose this is where my my interest has moved to now. And I think the debate here in the UK, which has been very, very well set up by the Secretary of State, Wes Streeting, about the three shifts. You have to move the health system from an analog to a digital system. You have to move it from hospital to community, and you have to move it from sickness to prevention. The last piece is profound. And by the way, to do all those three things, it's unrecognizable from a system of what it is today. But if you sort of stand back and say, the three big demographic challenges of the world today is low birth rate, aging, and an increasing incidence of chronic disease. Well, there are some horrendous statistics, and I'll use the northeast of the UK, and this is, this gets to the heart of the inequality issue, and it's not only do people in that region have a lower life expectancy than, had you lived in the southeast or other parts of the UK, but you live a lot longer part of your life in ill health. So for a male, it's something like 21 years, and for a female, it's 16 years. So I think what we've done in the last couple of years, we've turned health from how much can we afford to put into the health system, is how can we afford not to make the UK more economically and socially productive? Because not only are you spending large amounts of money of these people in poor health, but they can't contribute economically and socially. So I think we've had a big success in the last year of turning this into, health into an economic and a social problem. It's really caught the attention of government. You hear them now start talking about, sick people getting back into work. But this is the challenge of the developed world. Look at Japan, declining population. Look at the forecast for China. The population will decrease significantly, and if they have the same impact of chronic disease. So it's a massive economic, societal problem. So this is why prevention is so important. But just one point on this to why it is so profoundly difficult to shift is we talk about how wonderful the UK data set is and all the data the NHS has, and it does. Yeah, but it has a lot of data on old people and sick people and very young people. If you want to go to prevention, you need data on healthy people in their 20s, 30s, 40s and 50s at a risk of developing chronic disease, and then identify when you intervene. So this is a profound shift, and I think the UK is about the only country that can do this. And if you're watching this and you haven't signed up for Our Future Health, please do so, because the aim of that is to get a population of 5 million healthy people so that we can do the polygenic risk analysis, which shows your foundational risk to chronic disease, and over time, how you can educate yourself and adapt your lifestyle to reduce that incidence of risk, or maybe use cheap pharmaceuticals as well.
I think that's a really good and important shout out. Our Future Health.
Yes.
Because you're absolutely right. The biggest challenges as we look forward in the next 5, 10, 15 years are exactly this. How do you stay healthy, as well as those who have got chronic illnesses? How do you treat them, and treat them in a way that doesn't cause them suffering? And so at the heart of everything you've just talked about is data, right? Whether it's data that we voluntarily share to be able to help others in the future, or whether it's data in terms of what you're doing as an organisation to develop the treatments that will hopefully keep us all healthy as we live longer lives, or expected to live longer lives. And there's a conundrum, isn't it? It's a challenge. And it's true, because we talk about sustainable growth, but it is growth into a different world. It's a world that we haven't necessarily lived in.
Look, I think all future options, look different if you're, if you're mentally secure and you're healthy.
So innovation is absolutely critical in pharmaceutical. You've talked about it in terms of whether it's data, whether it's analytics, and how you think ahead. Is there a balance to strike between innovation and accessibility?
I mean, GSK has been built on that profound principle that everybody has a right to, every human life has a right to a medicine, and many of the medicines that they're required in a developing world are easily available. And I don't think any of us can sit peacefully, knowing that you have the means to improve health, but you can't. So I think, this is an important moment for a new form of global unity.
That comes back to everything we talked about early on, sustainable growth. And you've reminded me actually that the core, and when we had our last conversation, the core of what you were talking about around how do you deliver sustainable growth, it was through sort of the agility, the ability to think ahead, stay true to your purpose.
Yes.
And I think with GSK that comes through loud and clear. When we first met, gosh, years and years ago now, you always talked about making medicines available to those who need them.
Yes.
And we talked about, you talk about making a meaningful difference.
Yes.
And it is a meaningful difference, and it's a meaningful difference on the people that we service and support and look after, planet and profit. But actually, I love coming back to, making a difference. It's all about making a difference ultimately. So I just want to say thank you very much. It's been an absolute privilege to host this podcast over the last 3 years, 3 seasons, 35 guests. Thank you for being my first and last, John. Thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for all you've done, because you make it such a joy to be with you. So thank you.
Thank you.